All right. So I'm pleased to share with you a critique of my own work. This is a painting that I did recently called View of Oyster River. I did this locally in Durham, New Hampshire, overlooking Oyster River, which is a river that feeds into Great Bay on the east coast of the state. And I want to share about how I think about composition and also how I look back on my work and analyze the ways in which I've fallen short of my objective and how I can improve on the next painting as well. So it's a look at composition and then a critique of my execution. That's what I'll be talking about. So let's start with composition. So I hunted around for a good scene to paint for a little while. And the reason I settled upon this scene here is I thought there was a good system or game of values. There's just a nice interweaving of darks and lights, I feel like, in this picture. So looking at the scene itself, there's this bright blue sky, and it wasn't necessarily a super light value, but it was very rich in color, and I like that a lot. But we call it like a light to mid-tone value, maybe. And then it's separated by this tree line here, which is this dark middle tone value, right? And then it gets into these lights of the grassy field, which was really rich, like a really rich yellow. So color-wise, it was really beautiful too. And then this light value is, broken up by a dark here and then another middle tone back to light. And then it weaves its way into this dark here, separated by this dark of the shadows and the trees, and then into another light there, another dark, and then some middle tone blending here into this grass, back into this light value, and then into a middle tone again, and then back into this blue sky. So I like that there is an interest to the values. A lot of what I had been finding was like grass, tree, sky. So just very simple in the breakup of values. But I like this, that it was broken up. There was a lot of interest. And I think ideally when you're looking at a composition to paint, you want an interesting value game. And I think you want some like intelligible rhythm to it, ideally, in a sense of like you get how the values are moving. It's not like you don't necessarily want it to be this chaotic distribution of values. You want it to be more like a rhythmic distribution of values. I think that's where the fun is in a composition. And here there isn't, I don't know if there really is much of a rhythm. I think there kind of is a rhythm in the sense of like the top and bottom start out in middle tones. And then as you come from top and bottom into the center, you get into the contrast of light and dark. So there's this power center there. So maybe you could say that's the rhythm of the values. At the end of the day, I just felt that there was an interest to this, an interest that was not necessarily chaotic. Anyways, that's how I was attracted to this scene. That's why I chose it to paint. And then also just overall the color was so rich and vibrant. I just enjoyed looking at it. And you definitely like if you're going to spend a lot of time on a painting, you want to be interested in it. You want to enjoy looking at it. I think I spent 9 sessions out here, about 2 to 3 hours per session. So it's a good amount of time, almost 20 hours of just looking at something. So you want it to be pleasing to look at, and you want it to be pleasing to look at for your viewers as well. So that's why I settled on this composition. Now I'll move to an analysis of the execution here. And the first thing I'll say is like you might immediately notice some differences in color between the painting and the scene. And I'm going to judge these two as you see them right now. But I will say that I took photos of both, and I took a photo of the painting indoors, and obviously the picture is outdoors. So as you look at it right now, you might notice a temperature difference. The painting looks warmer than the scene. And warmth is a matter of like yellowness to orangeness. Like you can feel that the painting is a little bit yellower. I think you can also just kind of feel that temperature difference. That may or may not have to do with the way in which I photographed these images and put them onto my computer, you know? But I'm going to judge them right now as if the painting should be accurate to nature. And in that case, you can see how I've fallen short of the temperature of the scene. And my objective is to paint the painting as like as nature. It should look essentially the same, and it should capture the magic of what I saw in nature. So as it is now, you can see how it falls short of of nature because of that temperature difference, right? Another thing I'll say is that the foliage changed color over the duration of the painting. So you can see some reds and oranges in the trees in the painting that are not there in nature, right? And that's kind of a decision you make as a painter. Things change when you're painting outside, obviously. And so you have to make decisions of what to incorporate and what not to incorporate. I think ideally you would go out to paint when the conditions are the exact same each time you paint. That would be ideal. So you're not in a situation where you're creating things out of your head. You're just strictly painting what you see. But because the conditions were so variable for me at this time, the foliage was changing, the light was changing, the tide was actually receding pretty significantly. I had to make decisions about what the composition would be, and I had to work a little bit from memory. So that's just a factor of this game. But regardless, right now I'm just going to judge based on these two images. Okay. Um, so yeah, coloristically, you can see the temperature difference. You can see you can see in the painting there's not as much blue in the sky and the water as there is in the picture. That also I think plays with that warmth. Um, yeah, so you can see the blues in the sky, and the river are not as rich as in the picture here. Let's talk about values now. So if you blur your eyes down or you squint your eyes and you look at these two pictures, you can kind of see this better, but the trees in my painting are a little bit lighter in value relative to the whole scene, I think, than in nature. These trees in nature read a little bit darker. I think also like noticing values here, the dark in these trees, like these shadows here, they have a little bit more of a presence across the picture to the left in nature than they do in my painting. You can see how it's missing some dark right here. You really feel that difference. And part of the reason is because I think I took this picture when I first got there in the morning at like 9-ish, probably. And then I would paint, and I'd go out there each day and I'd paint from like 9 to 11 or 9 to 12. And the sun moved, right? And so the shadows changed. And so probably I would say about 11, I would lose this shadow here in this tree. And so that was a decision I made in the painting to to omit that shadow because I was painting later in the day. But looking at this picture right now from nature, I really like how dark this is. And I like how this dark value makes its way across the painting. And so I missed an opportunity there, I think, in the painting. Let's talk about shapes a little bit. So I do notice some inaccuracies in shapes. The first, it's a little bit subtle, maybe, but it feels to me like this band of trees. And actually, I'll draw here on this band of trees. If we notice the height relative to the width, and then we do the same for nature, that band I think feels a little bit taller in my painting than it does in nature. I don't know if you can feel that, but that's something to notice when you're painting is relative heights and widths of things. And so I personally don't think I got it quite right there in the painting. So something to improve upon next time is just to keep checking my shapes on a relative basis. Something else I think that's evident is this band of dark shadows right under this grass line there. It's thicker than in my painting. And you might say like, well, not by much, but that dark value in nature really holds a presence that it doesn't hold in my painting. And that doesn't have to do with the value because I got the value right relative to the scene, I think. It has more to do with the size of it. It just doesn't hold the same presence in my painting. There are some other things shape-wise. The angle of this bank here seems a little bit off, if you can tell. The bank up here in the front, I got a little bit general there. I think, it was the tide was receding often. I didn't have a lot of time to really observe that bank, and this is not an excuse at all. Like there are no excuses for getting something wrong. But those are the challenges that you face when you're working out of doors. It's quite a fun challenge, actually. You got to juggle all of these different things, and it makes you improve too, I think, observationally, but also from a memory perspective, because you have to register how things look, and you have to remember those things. Because when it's no longer there because of the changing conditions, you have to be able to execute it based off of memory. Um, Sometimes, anyways. So yeah, you can see the shape difference here. This is more interesting. This is just basically a straight line. This has more of a wave to it, and it's a bit thinner. There's such a thing as texture also. The texture of the water ripples here. It feels a little bit more textury in my painting than I think it does in nature. In nature, it really has this grace to it. I don't know how to explain it, but it is worthwhile to just feel things out in nature. Um, you can sort of feel certain phenomena and try to attach words to them, like grace, like these water ripples have grace. And then when you paint it, you ask yourself, do the ripples in my painting have the same grace? And I would say no, in this case, no. Um, I don't like also how in my painting those water ripples are the same thickness. Like they're thin, right? But they're all the same thinness. Whereas I think in nature you can see a little bit more variety in the size of those ripples. I think that would make it look a little bit more natural and less imagined. Um, yeah, I think on the topic of texture, there's probably more texture in this tree in nature than in my painting. In painting, again, it's a little bit more generalized and it lacks texture. It's more smooth. It feels texturous, if that's even a word, in nature. So those are things to feel out and to try to achieve. You want to get the same sense. Again, the objective is to paint the painting as like as nature. I lost focus. I didn't pay attention to this area here. You can see more interest there in nature, more articulation of shape in there. I'm rather pleased, I would say, at how the shadows turned out in my painting. I think they feel pretty close to nature. The one thing I'm noticing just looking at these two images is in nature, the value in here is flatter, whereas in my picture, you can feel a change in value. It's very subtle, but you can feel it. I think it does something to flatten the area a little bit. It just seems to flatten the form slightly. That's a slight thing, I think, but for the most part, I think I've achieved that well enough. You can see in the painting, I put some clouds in there. You know, the shape of these clouds is imagined. I imagined the shape. I observed the color and the edge quality of clouds as they went by. So I tried to incorporate those into the painting while making up my own shape and there's a there's a line to them as well. So I invented that composition with the clouds. Sometimes that happens in nature too. You know, if you see something just instantaneously that you really like and you want in your painting, and you have to put it in there, and there's and you do your best to put it in there from memory. In this case, I memorized the clouds. I probably didn't get the shape right, the shape of the clouds just right, but then I invented the composition of the clouds. I invented this line. Anyways, that's just an analysis of my execution of this painting. There's some more things there. You might notice other things. Some things I want to work on better next time are, I think, trying not to generalize. I know for a fact that I generalized this area here and other areas, and it irks me, you know, looking back at this, it just irks me. So I definitely want to improve upon that next time. And that's the journey of a painter. You know, you're always trying to get better. You're always trying to improve. So I want to be more specific with things. I want to observe, use my mind and sorry, use my eyes, not so much my mind. using my mind to analyze and to compare painting and nature, but not to invent, not to generalize. Use my eye to see and to paint. So more articulate, less general. That's going to be what I'm working on next time. Anyways, I hope this was helpful in some way. I hope you enjoyed it. And I think I'll post some more of these kinds of critiques. So thanks for watching.